Oh, Barry Dempster. I'm beginning to go through the number of things that might actually mean. Just an inflection. Oh, Barry Dempster. Oh, Barry Dempster. Scary. Thank you so much. Thank you, Hazel, for the lovely introduction. And thank you, Liz, for all the energy you've put into this. I do a poetry gala in Richmond Hill every spring. It's only a 2-hour, 3-hour event. It almost kills me. 9 years, just an amazing feat, Liz. Thank you so much for coming tonight. It's so great. I've never been to Durham before, so this is a real pleasure to go exploring. I'm going to read a poem from my collection, Love Outlandish. I've always been a little bit of a sucker for a good love story, but I think the story that ended up moving me the most was Edward Albee's Who is Sylvia, or the Goat? And it's the story of a man who falls in love with a goat. I think you have to take that seriously. The goat. I'm in love with a goat, the actor confesses to the actress, with just enough artifice to keep us sane and sitting down. I may be the only one who wonders if the hair would be wiry or soft, if a tail is something I could get used to, like a love handle or a birthmark, if those rectangular brown eyes have subtleties I've never considered before. A baa or a bark, I'm not sure what to listen for, but I imagine the breath ragged and sweet like lightly trampled grass, and a trembling that jitters through the entire body in a maze of hums. There's a trick I keep failing at, love, lust, and longing thrown into the air like apples, a juggler's feat of focus and blur, a balance constantly changing, smashed fruit, empty hands, the very air an aftershock, how theatrical. I love her fingers, but not her toes. I lust for the way he cocks one shoulder, longing for a piece of this, a prick of that, molecules shape-shifting into all sorts of impossibles, one toss at a time. But how can you love a goat without leaving everything else behind? The first whiskery kiss, a total commitment. No pretending it didn't happen, that barnyard stink. The actor trips across the stage and lo and behold, there's a meadow, buttercups shining like floodlights. A perfect day to go too far, to let the inner satyr out, to strip down to blue sky. I feel so alone, he shouts at the back rows, as if we were a wall slowly caving in. Oh, how I long to be found by the one who is losing ground with every foolhardy step. The lust that knows no bounds. I love the goat in you, I say, climbing on stage, being seen for the very first time. Thank you. I feel that there's a goat lover or two out there tonight. It struck me today, I live in Holland Landing, Ontario, which is just about an hour north of Toronto, sort of at the southern edge of the Holland Marsh. And we have a lot of land bush and meadows, and driving here today along Highway 89 and then 10, just how much open space there is, how fortunate we are. But if you bring a few writers along with you to this open space, it can suddenly sometimes seem a little crowded. Mary Lake Writing Retreat. Late afternoon, Mary Lake, islands dipping their fall poses in glass. 5 of us on the dock, rumoring over loons and deer, wondering whether something might happen we could write about. See that leaf waving to the great below? Is it stop sign red? No, lighter, rosé. Geez, can't one of us get it right? How about Chinese red, like the robes in a Zhang Yimou sword fest? Yes, as perfect as human beings who can't whoosh across the sky can get. 5 poems in the making, 5 shades of Chinese red, 1 over-observed leaf. Are writers competitive, a friend asks, wishing I could describe how we all reached for the leaf as one stretch, like Michelangelo's Adam multiplied. How just before it hit the ground, another followed and another, perfect copies of the same intention. We headed off in all 5 directions, leaves tucked behind our ears, poems spilling out like breadcrumb trails, follow me, know me, echoing into the richly described woods. Later that night, draped in moonlessness and searching for more, we almost bumped into a deer posed beside the boathouse. "You're real," we said in unison, as he sidled into the trees and we followed with our nets of reverence. Each one of us reached out and touched the darkness to our own soft parts. So this is what wild feels like. As close to speechless as we could be without sacrificing our communal tongue. Holy as a deer, we all would have written. In the notebooks we seem suddenly to have mislaid somewhere. Thank you. Thank you. I have my students, we go on things called poet walks, where it might be a forest, a shopping mall, the side of a highway, and we take our 5 senses and just absolutely immerse ourselves in reality. I had one young student who, when I suggested tasting things, who came back to me with a mouthful of lilac, and all I could think of was lilac was poison, and that I'd killed someone, but it was in the service of poetry. I went to a stable north of Toronto, and there was a horse there whose name was Sprout. He was a gelding. Sprout had got a piece of metal in his eye and had actually developed a terrible infection, had to have the eye removed, and then they had to take out part of the flesh around the entire right side of his face. He was absolutely terrifying. It was the most monstrous thing I'd ever seen. He, of course, became fascinated with me. I wanted to run, but I had a class full of students that I was telling them to eat lilacs and take chances. And blindness. The barn is ripe with geldings and mares. how well they get along without the bother of balls and fidelity. The one stallion snorts by the far door, as if disgusted by the easy equanimity, knocking the gate with his hammer hooves, letting everyone know they're unsafe. A sheen of nervousness in the air, flecks of hay drifting in the sliced sunbeams like tiny flares. Except for Sprout, across the way, one of the castrati, whose headbands beg a bold friendliness. From the left he swayed an apple butter, with an emperor's snout, a profile fit for a coin. But seen from the right, he becomes a missing eye, a long-ago accident, as if a cage had lost its golden bird or a shrine its simple saint. Gruesome, perverse, the worst thing you'll see today. Wouldn't blame you if you ran muck flicking from the soles of your shoes. But of course you'll stay. The empty socket of your will reminding you of how distorted you often feel. Just your heart alone is an ugly mess, if anyone ever really took the time for a good look. And so you ease closer, Sprout nodding, urging you in. He breathes the back of your neck, then lowers himself into a nuzzle, left side first, then right. Oh, Christ, here it comes, the accident that never ends, the loneliness that reminds you how much you need to be seen. The barn goes dark and light in separate strips, a pattern you'd once have thought was choice. This time, though, you touch it all, the bronze flanks, the shady fringe of mane, the nothingness that narrows to an incandescent finger. Finally entering the loss. Sprout whinnies, less alone now, as close to love as shock can get. You stake a foothold in the straw and shit and stare up at him, all flinches fled. Blindness, so soft and eager, it almost talks. Thank you. Thank you. Dying a Little is one of those books that you wonder when you play the "What Will My Last Book Be Called?" You wish you'd called it "Living a Lot." It comes from a friend's death, but it really ended up taking over me as a kind of intensity of living and of being in the world that I think sometimes that only loss can really teach us. It's one of the strangest experiences of how little I wanted to believe in this, how much I wanted to feel that thinking alone could take us into more life. It doesn't always work, but sometimes it's possible. Big mistake. January, usually so demure in its white sultan sheets, has had too much to grieve this year, tossing back its head, choking on rain. Today it's wearing a paste of leftover leaves and what looks like slush, well on the way to some other chemistry. Faded Christmas wreaths dangle from dented screen doors. Everywhere the plunge of melt disappearing into sewers. a rake lying across a brown lawn, fingers curled. This is the state of things when we hear Kathy may only have weeks to live. Brain cells scrambling with tiny fingertip tumors. Mother Nature on a sci-fi rattle. Sorry one time too many for all the stupid loss, and stupid it is. This fumbling fate, this big mistake. Poisonous mushrooms growing on the undersides of her shadow, getting bigger than her flickering bits of self. We can't imagine her paling in a hospital bed, head and shoulders cranked up for that final appearance. Can't or won't amounts to the same refusal. Instead, we picture her strong enough to walk these January streets, a red scarf wrapped around her pretty neck. We make her stop every now and then to push a tulip bulb back into the warming dirt. Not quite, not yet. She's kicking at the leaves, such long, optimistic legs. The rain persists as we race out to our cars, doing its damnedest to erase us. The daring secret is no longer Kathy's death, but the burst of glow as car doors open and the overhead lights splash on. There she is, in our passenger seats, begging a ride out of this long month, to a place where the sun is still God and the snow is in full bloom. We'll take her anywhere, we realize, outdriving the downpour, willing to go further than the truth, that last niggling boundary. Thank you. A good Buddhist that I sometimes try to be is to not hold on to experience, to let it run through my fingers and be what it needs to be and where it will go. One of the hardest things I've discovered is to let go of loss. We hold on to the worst that can happen sometimes because we're afraid there may be even worse to come. This is called get lost. He's ironing his cool shirt, the black one with sleek ivory stripes, when his right wrist begins to shake. Just a slip and he'd be scalded, but that's not it. The crisis is in amongst the muddled nerves, hormones flashing at tear ducts like toy ambulances. What's this all about? The alarm clock of loss went off before 6. Surely he's accrued some stealth, some heft since then. But loss it is. One hair too many blown from his head. One great idea sledding for a dark ice end. A word left dangling at the slam of every sentence. It's not the done deals that palsy him, the buried parents, the scraps of youth, the old collection of Beatles cards that vanished into someone else's greed. No, the old griefs are slowly arching into figurines, dust collectors. It's this very moment that's suddenly quaking, stirring up distances too wide to cost, too willful to calm. Bon voyage, good riddance, get lost. His wedding ring flies off his finger, an instant UFO. Your love for him spins inside out, a shrug of shrunken bones. Someone not even born yet shouts no, her open mouth a begging bowl. Shakes, intensifying into shivers, the iron hissing in his hand, his shirt looking flat and skinned. He'll lose this shirt one day, time's dependable fray, which makes him love it just a little less. He'll lose the stripes, the pearly buttons, the way the collar likes to strut. Lose the hot cool, the way the cotton adds his nakedness to its list of accomplishments. Thank you. I'm going to read a few new poems. One of the things that I tend to be fairly passionate about is the necessity for wildness to exist and for us not to tame it all. Sometimes wild isn't so much for what we can do with it as what it will end up doing to us. And I went through a period where the fox world seemed to be making an appearance. Up where I live, just outside, across from a particular farm. I'm down in Toronto at St. Clair Avenue and St. Clair and Avenue Road, and in New York City in Central Park. In the beginning, I thought the fox was there to teach me something. Eventually, I thought that quite possibly I was there to teach the fox something about the wildness of being human. Fox. The fox was wearing shadow like a visor. Hours had been spent arranging the willow branches she crept beneath, the angles and crotches, the way leaves were torn by breeze, then blithely pressed together, how the whole of it became her image, dappled, posed, and posted. First fox, or simply Eden. Place worn down to her three-letter name. She stared at me, blue Corolla that I appeared to be, the law of motion blurred to the curve in the road, a relationship that meant no threat, though a nuisance all the same. Protect the real me at any cost. I'd love to say that our eyes locked, but no, hardly a skim. It was the gleam of windshield she doubled with, the rattle of the engine as I braked. She pretended I was sun and backed further into forests full regalia, made of will and chlorophyll and fever, as if a fox could become a tree, and a tree an axis for the world to do its tilting. Minutes later, the shock of seeing through fox-like eyes, the sneak of my own driveway baiting me. The number 45 on my front door like a kill list. The pepper steak defrosting on my kitchen counter like a sister or a brother. In the bathroom mirror, I discovered the savage thinness of my own cheeks, the hunger for energy other than my own, dividing my brow into slats of sorrow, vanishing points of flame. It was she who turned me into a narcissist, a beast, gazed down at my lap in the scalding tub, and remembered how her mother had once gnawed off her own foot to escape a farmer's trap. In the end, her eyes shut mine, and we slept in distances too numerous, too painful to be mapped. I've never been the same. Shadows bushier than ever, sly. Even in great cities like New York, the light is an ever-present alarm, like blood being licked from teeth. On 88th, just down from the museum where the dead lay counting lost instincts, I saw a plane tree leaning awkwardly over the park's stone walls, barely touching me with its flickering shades of gold and brown, yet igniting the back of my neck, releasing a scruff of small red flames. I slunk closer, could almost touch the lowest branch. Gazing back at the busy sidewalk, I saw copies of myself carrying on the regime. Too many equations to master. The fox in me shivered, then slipped out of consciousness, the same retreat we all live in, one ducked wildness after another. On a Park Avenue bus, she entered me again, reminding me of the fox stole my mother used to wrap around her neck. I would stroke its fur until fire lit the innermost depths of my fingers. What have I done to you, my shadow? What kind of trap is this? The bus with its load of bodies stops and starts 100 times, like a civilization dying from fear, then hope, then fear again. Look at the bone language of a man cowering against a window, scenery slashing by. Thank you. A bit on the lighter side. Love as humiliation. Princess. I remember it as brittle to the touch, my plastic princess crown. The one Cora pleaded with me to place on my head. I was already in my 40s, had worn pink only once before, back in the 80s, when gender got mixed up a bit. Boy George, the Thompson twins, Brian Perry, Ferry with his soft eyes. But Cora wasn't interested in history. 4-year-olds are too busy creating the world. She made me sit on the rug with my legs crossed, dubbed me Princess Barry, a title that made her smile grow watermelon wide. I should have known I was the type to confuse love with humiliation. Several years later, I played the roles of mentor, savior, friend, all stuck together like a bag of jujubes left out in the sun. I would have even worn a crown had it been necessary to prove my devotion. But back then, enjoying uncledom, plastic royalty seemed extreme enough. She gave me a magic wand to hold as well, similar enough to a sword to pass masculine muster. Once she got over her delight at rendering me pink and powerless, we played a game where I had to choose a husband, either a Ken doll or a chewed-up teddy bear. She married us while single-handedly fighting off a herd of killer dinosaurs. I loved her so much, I held my head straight the entire time. The crown steady as a good Calvinist reputation. Are you king? I asked, trying to be more involved. No, I'm a girl, silly, she fired back. Thank you. And my last poem, I went to Berlin last summer and spent the most amazing 3 weeks of my life. And what I realized is that sometimes in the sensual intimacy of a place, where you're able to see something that might be possible anywhere, yet it manages to capture the spirit of place in a way that just takes you completely inside. So amongst the museums and the war memorials and the amazing things that that city had to offer, there was one moment, being here, Berlin. A burst of late afternoon light, like a green grape meeting the pressure of thumb against juice. The patio at Telkovsky's filling up, glass-topped tables already smudged with elbows. A waitress carries leather-bound wine lists under her arm and will soon reappear with baskets of pumpernickel and black olives. She, like everyone in Berlin this June, is wearing a welcome mask with only the hint of a cinch in the space between eyebrows. This is to be my last night, and I'm already planning to lean over my dinner plate as I eat, and then sit back. Give the bold brown sparrows a clear landing strip. Let them feed on me the way disciples in the Gamalda Gallery that very afternoon had fed on various versions of Christ. It's at this point of self-indulgence when a young couple blushes past, choosing the table facing me. Their breeze is lemon peel rubbed on skin and something pastry, as if their chemistry is in the process of refining them as they choose their seats and display other colors to what will soon insist on being called early evening. They are quite probably more beautiful than Berlin, which adds envy to my loss. There I am, about to shear myself from a city that has only recently become a fabric I can bear. And yet suddenly I feel another dreamy layer of being here, like sugar entering the very idea of frosting. My taste buds ache as I watch the pink of the young woman's ankles tucked beneath her chair, cobblestones glowing. She runs her palms through her red blonde hair, an act of being felt as much as seen. But the most shocking thing is how his white t-shirt climbs his spine, leaving a patch of bare skin where the black band of his underpants show above the scoop of his jeans, as if he had dressed in a hurry, seams misaligned, a hint of veiled nakedness. And it strikes me now that he had bent over her less than an hour ago, just as daylight was about to explode its buried pale greens, and kissed her ankle bones, while she had reached behind him, parting cotton and denim. With all its history of extremes, Berlin had rarely frowned my entire visit. I almost forgot the pain inherent in pleasure, until I look away from his exposed flesh and see an even greater intimacy in the way she holds him with her eyes, not even fluttering a lash when a sparrow, my sparrow, lands in the middle of their table, all beak and feet, like keys to a city beyond the museum's most precious teaks and pearls. Thank you very much.